Hello and welcome to another knitting episode from me. My name is Helle and I'm coming to you from Odense in Denmark on a chilly spring day. We're in the 1-digit temperature still, eagerly/impatiently awaiting spring. However, you can perhaps see the hint of the cherry blossom trees outside, so it's definitely greener and more pink and white here and there. You know, the blossoms are coming out, but it's definitely cool, which is nice when you love sweaters. But knowing that spring and summer don't last all that long, I'd like it to get a move on now. On the program today, I have 2 finished objects, 1 dormant WIP that I'm not going to go into a whole lot, 1 active WIP that's new that you haven't seen, and then I've been swatching for a few projects and I'm so undecided. So there's a little bit of that. I'm also undecided when it comes to summer projects, so I might talk a little bit about that as well. And of course I'm going to start off with a quote and finish also with a couple of book recommendations and 1 or 2 small, well, I'm not going to talk about them as epiphanies, but I've certainly had epiphanies during some non-knitting podcasts that I'd like to recommend to you. So if you're interested in that, stick around until the very end. If not, I will let you know when that comes around and you can mosey on out of here quietly. And on that note, I also just briefly wanted to mention that, as most of you probably know, before I got into the whole knitting video/podcast game, I made sort of more regular videos, sometimes travel videos, sometimes videos about my life here in Denmark, thoughts on life, musings. And I noticed once I got into the knitting videos, sometimes when I then posted a so-called ordinary or regular episode, subscribers would sometimes leave. Everybody is free to do exactly what they want, but it did, I think, discourage me a little. Not out of making ordinary videos, but actually from making knitting videos. And I do want to make, I have some ideas for some non-knitting videos. So you're completely free to just ignore them and not watch them, but it would help me out and the channel out, and also be, frankly, encouraging if you don't unsubscribe. I know that it's probably not the smartest thing to do algorithm-wise, YouTube algorithm-wise, to make different kinds of content on one channel, but I honestly can't worry about that sort of thing. You know, it would just be, I wouldn't want to make 2 different channels, because it's all part of my life, and it's not as if I don't make more knitting videos. I certainly do. I would just like to make the others once in a while, and I'd love it if you'd stick around. Okay, so that's that. Oh yeah, I also have some new yarn. I guess you could call it acquisitions. One of the yarns is definitely involved in my current work in progress, so I'll show you that. And then I'd like to start with a quote as per usual. It's not a poetic quote this time, but it's definitely a philosophical / maybe self-help quote that makes the quote smaller, and that's definitely not what I mean to do, but it would literally be self-help. So I was watching this podcast, one of the ones I'm gonna refer back to, where the talk was about awe and the ability to experience wonder. The person being interviewed is Dr. Dagner Keltner, and he said that wonder, the mental state of openness, questioning, curiosity, and embracing mystery, arises out of experiences of awe. And when we feel a sense of wonder, we can be wonderful human beings. And we can find that feeling not just in once-in-a-lifetime experiences, but even amidst the slowly turning wheels of everyday life. And he also says, slightly long quote, I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure that you get the whole picture. Awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends your current understanding of the world. So he talks about, of course, things like nature, music, spiritual practice, art, but certainly also, and perhaps even especially, other people's courage, kindness, strength, and overcoming. And the whole point is also that if you're able to experience this, or you put yourself in circumstances where you can experience this, you will essentially feel happier. And he also says it's a way of quieting our small selves, the little egos, the nagging voice of the interfering neurotic. And that we all can put ourselves in contexts where we are able to feel more awe. And I will just, so that's not really a quote. It's more of a throwing the ball into your corner, if you will. I think we could all try our best to feel those little moments of awe, and to maybe lower the standard for when we should feel awe. You don't have to stand on a precipice and look into the Grand Canyon or the Machu Picchu. It can be small things in your daily life, and it will not only give you more happiness, it will actually also improve your immune system and your sort of neural makeup. So I'll leave that to you maybe to ponder, and I will return to it at the end, just briefly, where I came upon this and the book he wrote. Of course, there's a link to the whole knitting thing, because I think we've all experienced that sense of slight palpitations when we come upon maybe a yarn or a sweater or a garment, something that suddenly it's like, oof, the moment of inspiration flashes upon our sort of mind, and we want that in our lives. And of course, moments of creativity is also very much part of this, I feel, and also moments of connectivity, which he also underlines, when we can connect with others. So that's also, of course, the link I wanted to make here, how we can feel sort of excitement and awe and wonder at things in our creative lives. On that very sort of philosophical note, let's get into some more pragmatic details about the finished objects, one of which, of course, I'm wearing. It's the Aegyo sweater, the finished object at last. Apropos Machu Picchu, this was a bit of a climb, and I must say I'm really happy and relieved that I'm finally finished with it, because it did require, as you know, quite a bit of surgery, and many of the details about the sweater are in the last video, if not the last two videos. So I'm not going to get into everything here. I will just say that it's a design by Aegyonet, hence the name Aegyo sweater. And I used the really lovely yarn Puno by Cardigan or Gepard yarn. And it's in this lovely lavender color, which is definitely a pop of color in my wardrobe and in my aesthetic comfort zone even. And I'm delighted that I made it in this color, because I knitted something in gray right before and right after, so I keep on having this sort of frequency of neutral pop of color. And I think I'm kind of delighted with that, because then there's the whole sort of things I typically gravitate towards, mainly the neutrals, but not only. And then every now and then this unexpected pop of color. You might say that the neutrals give me calm. They bring me a sort of sense of comfort and peace. You don't only need peace and calm, you also need bursts of energy. And I think, in a sense, that's what the pops of color give me. And also, I've mentioned that the word explorative is definitely one of the words that I would apply to my knitting. And if that's the case, then part of the exploration has to do with color and yarns, of course. So I will, of course, insert photos of me wearing it where you can see the fit that I finally landed on. And I have to say, I'm really happy with it. For me, I think it was worth the effort and the time. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have been happy with it. It would have been lying in my wardrobe, and all the hours and all the yarn would have been wasted, which would be such a shame. One of the things I talked a lot about was that it has this drop shoulder effect, and part of the reason why it goes all the way down to here is that I knitted the size 2 from up here. Oh, let me just remember. See, this actually annoys me a little bit in this too, but this is where the sleeve is long enough. They just tend to ride up, and then you can see my sleeves underneath. that always annoys me, but I don't want them any longer. They come to here, which is fine. But you can perhaps see every now and then the shirt I'm wearing underneath. That's because I knitted this on a slightly larger needle because of my sensitive skin. I didn't want it to sit too close up to the skin on my neck, because that's where I'm most sensitive. So it is a little more, I wouldn't say gaping, but a little more open than what the pattern calls for. So I cast on and knitted down to here and down to here, size 2. And then, of course, I also knitted the rest as a size 2, hence all the sweater surgery. But I've measured it across, and it's very close to the size 1 across the chest. And that's because I took it in underneath the arms. And you can see here that this is what it looks like now. I took in maybe about 8 stitches on each side. And of course you're not going to do that, but if you wanted to do something like this and you go with the as yet not quite updated pattern, but it's any minute now. But if you choose that and you want the very sort of low drop shoulder, you could just start off with a size larger, and then once you're underneath the arms, instead of increasing, as I mentioned in my last video, you can decrease. And then maybe knit a couple of rounds and then measure. See, is that the chest circumference that you want? But she is updating the pattern, as I've mentioned a couple of times. And that was part of the reason why I made this, so that I could give her feedback on the pattern. So I just think it's a little bit of clarity that's been changed, and the diagram has been changed a little bit. And I know that, it's just around the corner, but you would be able to knit it even now. And it's a lovely sweater. And honestly, I think this yarn is just delightful for this pattern. They go well together. So I'm very pleased with this. Also, I knitted it on a 6mm or US 10 needle. So in that sense, it's a pretty quick knit. Oh, for reference, let me just say that I think it measures about 110 centimeters around, which gives me about 20 centimeters of positive ease. And what is that in inches? I'll figure out and put it on the screen. But as I said, it's pretty much a size 1. So yeah, I'm very happy with it. There's one thing I want to mention, and that's I think I'm just gonna put on the next finished object to talk about this so I can show you. Hold on. Okay, I know it's a bit annoying perhaps that I just put on something else and continue to talk about this, but I will get there. But I mentioned to you, I think in the last video, and if you didn't watch that, of course you wouldn't know, so I'm just going to mention it again. But I mentioned that at the very bottom here, the pattern calls for German short rows, so that you have a slightly longer back. And when I made the short rows, it looked different. I couldn't hit gauge. And the reason why is that my gauge is clearly different from when I knit in the round to when I knit flat. So I unraveled that, and then I simply made the short rows in the ribbing. And that just solved that. So that's going to be my go-to strategy when I have to make short rows, suddenly go from knitting in the round to knitting flat. And in fact, lately I've been looking at patterns where you typically knit flat and then you join in the round. And I wouldn't say I avoid them, because many of the patterns I want to knit have that structure. But it's tricky for me. I have to figure out a way of putting different needles on either side, depending on whether or not I'm knitting a wrong side row or right side row. And yes, you can see it's, or maybe you can't see, but it's half fisherman's rib. So it's a very sort of a squishy fabric, quite delightful. And the cables are on the front only. Initially, I wanted the cables to be on the back also. But once I started knitting, I was actually pretty grateful that there weren't any cables on the back, because then it would have been all over cables on the body. It would have been quite a bit slower. And it already takes quite a long time to do these. But I also like the squishiness of them. I think, I love the half fisherman's rib. It's become one of Egonit's trademark designs. So yeah, as you can see, this is what it looks like, boxy. Oh, and about the sleeves, I ended up picking up maybe 20 stitches fewer than the pattern originally called for. So a lot fewer, and I'm really happy with this. So all in all, a really cozy, delightful sweater that kind of gives me the same feel as the Bowie. Cozy, slouchy, wearable, and fun. So that's the Ego sweater, which once the pattern is going to be updated, I can definitely recommend. And I think I can also definitely recommend the yarn. It's fun and it's soft. But if you don't have access to Puno, I think another yarn that is very similar, that would be able to give you the same vibe, the same feel, would be Snifnuk, which is a lovely yarn. I've worked with it a couple of times, and they have so many beautiful colors. I would not hesitate to make one using Snifnuk. So my next finished object is the Popo jacket, which is this lovely short cardigan. You can see the drape here, that I've already worn quite a lot, because it's like, yeah, I think one of the things I'm into, I hadn't actually put it into words, but I think I'm into what you might call elevated loungewear. It's relaxing, it's slouchy, it's comfortable, but it's also, to me anyway, has that sort of elevated, understated, comfortable yet chic, elegant look. And I like it, I've mentioned that before, I like it when a garment can hit that very sort of strange sort of in between comfortable and elegant. And this gives me that vibe as well. It's by Ego Knit, and I was part of the testing team. I came a little late, partly because I had to, I didn't have to. I suggested to Caroline that I could perhaps try it in a different yarn combination from the one she and the other testers tried, because as much as I felt the need for a cardigan, I also knew that really warm cardigans will not exactly serve the purpose that I'm looking for. Once you can open it, it's already serving its purpose for sure. But I had been quite happy with the yarn combination of the Sion kimono that I knitted last year. In that one, there's only 2 strands. Here, you work with 3 strands. In the original pattern, it's 1 strand of Javol from Lang Yarns and 1 strand of their lace. And I used 1 strand of Trio 1 from Isea plus 2 strands of silk mohair. Let me just find the color. See if I can find it somewhere in here. Okay. So many gray yarns in there, I couldn't find it. As I said, I used 2 different yarns to combine, and I don't have very much left, so this is the tiny bit that's left. This is the bit that's left from the Trio 1. It looks a little darker here. Trio 1 is a mix of 50% linen or flax, 30% cotton, and 20% rayon. So be a cooler garment, cooler fabric that it creates once you have a non-wool as a kind of main yarn, I guess. Of course, it does heat up once you add the silk mohair, especially when you have 2 strands. And Caroline and I both talked about afterwards how you could easily just use the 1 strand if you want an even lighter garment. It would create a slightly more open fabric, of course, but you might just go down maybe a half or a whole needle size, or keep the open fabric depending on what you want. And I wouldn't actually hesitate to keep to use the same needle, which by the way was 5.5 millimeter for me, or 6 millimeter in the pattern that is US 9 or US 10. So you could easily change it up, and of course you can also use completely different yarns. So for reference, this color is called Sage. It's actually gray, it's like a metal kind of gray, medium gray. And then I use this really lovely silk mohair from Isea. And what's interesting about this, I think, is that the core, you can't see that here, of course, but the core is like off-white, a warm off-white even. And then the gray itself is like slightly more sort of silvery gray. So it creates an interesting color. And I really, really like this. In some lights, it looks like a sort of grayish, like a beigey gray, but in other lights it's clearly just plain gray, and I like that. One thing you could also do is you could easily make it longer. Somebody asked me, I think on Instagram, if I thought it would be possible to make it longer, and Carolina had also talked about that it would be completely obvious to make it longer, and I was thinking about that as well. I didn't have yarn enough. I was given this yarn in connection with the test knit. And I had, as you can see, I went to my local yarn shop and bought one more ball of the silk mohair because I ran out. And that's because I actually ended up, this is my 9th ball of silk mohair. So there's quite a lot of silk mohair in here because you use 2 strands. So you could easily get away with maybe 4 or 5 if you knit the first size, probably 5. But that's because there are fewer meters. There's less yardage in the silk mohair from Isa than the lace from Lang Yarns. So it does require quite a few of those. And I wanted actually a short cardigan because it gives me the same vibes that the Cardi Cocoon by Anna Vincel does. And that one is very long. So I thought this would be a really ideal sort of addition to my wardrobe because I don't have a cardigan like this. And now that my knits are accumulating, it's about finding things that sort of fill a hole, if you will, in the wardrobe, something that you don't already have a million of. Yeah, and also depending on how you want the fabric, I tried knitting first with a 6mm. I first of all didn't hit gauge, but even if I did hit gauge, I might still have sized down because I knew that it was going to be an oversized cardigan, an oversized that drapes really nicely, so it's not too oversized. But also this yarn combination to me invited a slightly different needle size. So yeah, so 5.5mm I used, and if I were to use just the one strand, I probably would go down to maybe a 5mm. Depending on what the fabric looked like, I would definitely look at the fabric. And I was also pondering knitting this up in a longer size, in a completely different color. What I would then do is, as you can see here, there are increases. There are increases to create this sort of idea of a V. And I would just probably make them at make the increases with more rows between each increase. So the interval or the frequency of increasing, I would just, stretch out a little depending on how much longer I wanted it. And I would do the same for the increases or the decreases, for the decreases under the arms. By the way, you can see here they have this double faux seam, which is sort of a characteristic of the Popo patterns. She has a sweater as well called Popo sweater, which is really cute. And then the whole thing is finished with an I-cord. So it has a really neat finish, as you can see here, and around the sleeves. And actually, before I'd completely finished the I-cord, I think I'd maybe made from down here and then around to the other side, I washed it and blocked it, and I pinned it out, I would say aggressively. That's actually the opposite, because I feared that I had picked up too many stitches so that it was sort of all wonky and it didn't look so neat. But it came out fine in the washing. I just want to make sure that I didn't finish the whole I-cord only to discover that it was too sort of loose and then having to unravel the whole thing. It did grow quite a bit when I washed it, when I was finally done with it. The sleeves grew a lot, but that's fine. I mean, I like them. I typically end up knitting the sleeves a little too short and then having to go back and knit them longer. So I'm definitely going to keep this. It's part of the elevated loungewear look, I think. I also want to say that, it's a double moss stitch, which is, I love it. And it's easy to knit when you knit. For me, it's easy to knit the alternately knits and purls because I knit continental. Maybe it doesn't matter if you knit English, I have no idea, but I just hear that some people don't like purling. I can see having to knit or purl a whole sweater would be maybe a little annoying, but I don't mind when it's every other stitch, because then a little something is going on, and at the same time it's easy and meditative. And I definitely needed something a little simpler after all my cable projects, to be honest. As much as I love cables, I was also sort of going, okay, I need something that requires just slightly less brain power. So this was exactly that project. It was not extremely easy to the point of being too simple, but it was easier, and it was also quicker. It was quite quick for me. It only took maybe a couple of weeks, which is quick for me. And that was, I felt, that was gratifying. What I should have perhaps said in the beginning is also sorry for taking so long to film or record. I've been busy, obviously, but also I have to recharge. I have to take time, practically sit in a room by myself to recharge every time I'm sort of socially active. And speaking on camera or even posting a photo on Instagram is demanding on my energy, I have to say. It's sort of, having to put yourself out there, or not, I wouldn't say performing, but still, it's the opposite of sitting in a room by yourself having to do nothing, and the world demands nothing of you. Nobody would want to do that always. That would be lonely and unchallenging and not much fun at all. But I do have to recharge between things like that, especially now that I'm teaching again yoga, where during a yoga class there isn't much conversation, of course. It's just me having one long monologue, and that can be, as much as I love it, it's also a little draining. It's not the monologue part I love, it's the teaching yoga. But that means I do need to sit in a room by myself and knit often, and not, have to worry about when is the next deadline and when do I have to record, and oh gosh, I need to post a photo of the latest finished object, that sort of thing. So I really enjoy the knitting part of it. The rest is something I have to sort of gear up for. It's not because I don't enjoy it, but it's in another gear, another mode, I would say. And also the month of April is typically a month of what we in Denmark call confirmations. And confirmation, it sounds like a very weird term, but it's kind of our version of a bar mitzvah, where 14-year-olds, 13 or 14-year-olds have this thing called a confirmation, which is ostensibly a religious ceremony where they confirm their baptism or christening. But essentially it's just a coming of age party where they have a party and they get gifts, and there's a brief ceremony in church first. But there's two in my family this month, and one of them I've already been to, and there were so many people at that party, 77 people. I couldn't believe it. And I met my cousin. It was my nephew, my brother's son, who had this confirmation. And I knew that my brother has been in contact with a cousin of mine whom I haven't seen for 20 years, partly because back when we moved back and forth between the States, we sort of lost touch with parts of my family, and then we moved to different parts of the country. So he was there. I was like, oh my God, my long lost cousin. So it was just a very energetically demanding day for me in good ways, but also just, it took me days to recover from that. And so that's why I'm sometimes not I don't necessarily record on the days that I want to. And I have to I have to recharge. That's just the way it is. And I know you don't necessarily need that whole story. I'm just explaining, not excusing. So yeah, definitely a pattern I can recommend. Easy, wearable, interesting, quick. And if you don't use this yarn combination, it doesn't have to be very expensive either. I forgot to say, this is the third ball of the trio, so obviously not very much trio. And if you can make a thinner garment with the 5 balls of silk mohair, you know, it's not very expensive at all. And honestly, the 2 strands of silk mohair does mean that it's warm. Yeah, it's warm. So I'm just gonna take it off for a little while. One thing I wanted to say about the length, I didn't think I was gonna love a cardigan in this length because it just hits right sort of below my waist or above the bottom of my butt. I was like, do I not want something that can warm my butt when I walk around in it? And my answer to that is actually no. One major reason being that then I don't sit on it and wrinkle it. It makes it easier sometimes. Sometimes when I wear my cardigan and I sit down on it, I'm so worried that I'm going to flatten the back of it where I sit on it. And I don't have to worry about it with this one. So I think it's actually quite practical in that sense also. Oh, maybe I should also just say that maybe you can see it better here. You start at the back and you knit the back. Do you knit I think, as far as I remember, you knit the back down to here to where you start the sleeves. Put the stitches on hold, then you pick up for the 2 front pieces. First one, then the other, and then you join in the round. And then towards the end, you pick up sleeves here. So it's not difficult, I wouldn't say, not at all. The only tricky thing was the I-cord. I had to sort of read the instructions quite a few times. And I forget if I commented on the instruction, but I got it, and it was easy once you got going on that. Okay, so that was the Popo jacket. Let me move on to my current work in progress. The Dormant work in progress is the Aurelia pullover by Sari Nordlund, and I'm not even going to show you because I have stalled a little, and the reason why is that I have knitted down to where I'm supposed to split for sleeves, and I'm nowhere near where I would be able to split for sleeves. What I mean by that is that my row gauge is clearly off, which it almost always is, but off by a long shot here. So I've probably knitted to about here. So obviously I'm not going to be able to split for sleeves yet, which means I have to do quite a bit of sort of math in terms of how much longer. Not only that, but should I make more increases on the front and the sleeves before I reach that point? And how many increases or how many stitches are you going to be picking up under the sleeve by then? You know, so there's quite a bit of stuff. So I've put it aside for now, also because there's so many cables, and I just wanted a bit of a break from cables. It's beautiful. I've knitted the collar, and it's really gorgeous, but it needs a little break. But my active WIP is something that you, as I mentioned, haven't seen. I'm just going to put this on again because it's now actually a little cool. My active work in progress. Let me see how I can explain this. I had said yes to participating in a kind of project where I was to knit up 2 sweaters in some yarn that I hadn't tried before. I would be gifted the yarn, and I thought that sounded like a lovely project. There were a number of garments I could choose from, or projects, not only garments, I could choose from, and then I would be given the yarn. And I chose 2, one of which I'm not sure I'm gonna make, probably not, but the other one I'm gonna make even though the project has been abandoned now, because I'd already started and I'd said yes to the garment because I really loved it. I thought it was a cute design. So let me show you the design. And ridiculously of me, I've just started to separate for sleeves. So it's in a weird place that I show you this. The sweater has not actually come out yet, but it's coming out very soon. This is not a test knit, but it was going to be part of this project. So I imagine she's going to release it very soon. It's by a Danish designer I had not tried before called Pia Trans. And she has a really lovely aesthetic. She uses a lot of gray and sort of moody colors, neutral colors that I quite like. And this is what the stitch pattern looks like. The sweater's called Trellis. And Trellis in Danish is espalier, which is the sort of framework that you have plants climbing up on on a house or something, or in a garden. So it's a technique certainly I had not tried before, or a stitch pattern I hadn't tried before. And as you can see, it's a round yoke. The yarn is absolutely scrumptious. It's the first time that I try using this yarn, and I've been wanting to try some yarn by this Danish yarn dyer for quite a while. Let me show you. I'm using 2 strands of this yarn by A Knitter's World. Bettina, who has this yarn company called A Knitter's World, she's dyed up these skeins of this base called Fluffy. And hold on, let me just read you what Fluffy is. Fluffy is 42% baby alpaca, 35% silk, 13% fine merino, and 10% yak. And 50 grams gives you 400 meters at only 105 kroner, which is not bad at all. That's like, how much is that? I'll write that on the screen. I haven't even found out. But that's not bad at all. I'm only going to be using 4 balls of this yarn, so that's a little over 400 kroner for this sweater, which is ridiculous. And this is just so soft. This on me is next to skin soft, which in itself is like, every time I find a yarn that's next to skin soft on me, it's a small miracle. And this is the undyed version, and the base, did I mention that? The base is called Fluffy, which it definitely is. It certainly lives up to it. There's other colors as well. Mainly, I think, dark colors. I would actually love to try this in, she's got many really cool bases, one of which is a camel, another is a mink, and she's got some really lovely colors that I definitely would like to try more of, one of which is a cherry blossom, and I'd love to try this base on a cherry blossom. And I think the fabric is just so lovely. I think the pattern required 6mm, and I made a swatch, of course, using the 6mm needle, and decided to try 5.5, and ended up going with 5.5, which is maybe a little weird because I think the designer is a looser knitter than me. Most people are looser knitters than me. But I preferred this fabric because I didn't want it to be entirely see-through. So you can't really see this. I can only insert the one picture I have of it. I probably already have. So I'm not sure about the fit. I think the sleeves are, it's super oversized, it says in the pattern, which is another reason why I chose to go with a 5.5. And I don't know how this yarn reacts when I wash it and block it. So, let's see. It's the first time in a long while I'm knitting a round yoke, which is also interesting. The variety is always lovely. So I'm having fun with this now. It's mainly just stockinette. And as I said, I've just separated. So I'll be just knitting round and round on the body. Probably before I finish that, I might actually knit at least one sleeve to figure out the length that I want on the body. I might end up having to let the yarn decide that. I don't know what the yardage is going to be like. So let's see. But I'm enjoying this. It's easy. It moves fast, and it's a very simple pattern in the sense that it's not very wordy. It gives you what you need, maybe even slightly less, because up here there were some increases. I didn't quite know how to do them, and I thought I'd understood what the pattern told me to. And then when I got down here, I had to make those again. I'm like, I'm not sure this is right. And then I went and Googled some things that I thought could help me, and it turned out I hadn't quite done it right up here. So I have little sort of stitches that look a little like pearl bumps here and there that are not quite supposed to be there, but I don't really care. I mean, it's fine. And the yarn, I think, is very forgiving in that sense, because it looks rustic, but it's definitely not rustic. So it's not 100% even, and that means it's a little forgiving. The Fluffy lives up to its name, I have to say. So that's that. This is so close to this in color, it's almost ridiculous. But the color is, I love it. You know, it's a really pretty color, I think. And as I said, pop of color, neutral, neutral. So the next thing that I'm going to be knitting on is probably, I think I'm going to finish this first. I was, years ago, definitely, I was about to say a monotonous knitter. Monogamous. And as mentioned last time, I would very much like to knit the Crystal. It's not even called Crystal Sweater, just Crystal by Helga Isager. But definitely a goal of mine is to use up more of the yarn that I already have and not buy new yarn unless it's to complement or use in addition with some of the yarn that I have in order to make a project. And I've had this absolutely beautiful yarn sitting in my stash since May last year, when Carmen from the Knitting a Good Yarn podcast brought it over from Canada. I bought it back in maybe March, and then Sonder Yarn sent it to Carmen for her to bring it to me when she visited me here in May of last year. It was just the most amazing day we had. Because at the time, Sonder Yarn did not ship to Europe, but they do now. My gosh. The only thing that's keeping me from ordering maniacally from their site is the ridiculous VAT and fine that the Danish authorities put on anything you buy from overseas, which is just so annoying. You know. But anyway, I've had this particular yarn combination in my stash. It looks maybe a little more blue on screen than here. It's definitely mint, and it's definitely so lovely. I love it so much. And for some reason I have not seen this color in any yarn in Denmark. I don't know why. What is up with that? This is the most scrumptious minty color. It just screams spring. But it's also just I don't know, ethereal and refreshing, and you know, I feel like I'm leaping into some kind of imaginary world just looking at this. It's just so lovely. This is the Sunday Morning DK 75% BFL 25% Masham in the color Window Shopping, and the silk mohair, which is the base halo, is called Glass or Ice, and it's just so lovely. And I cannot wait to use it. Sonder Yarn, they have so many beautiful colors, and some of them I haven't, you know, they have a very, very pale blue as well that I would like to get my hands on at some point. But maybe if I go to Canada someday or the US. But I'm really actually quite grateful that they do ship to Europe now. So the possibility is there. If you live in another European country from Denmark or Poland, I heard that they have a pretty high VAT as well. You know, now's your chance to get your hands on some beautiful Sonder yarn. It's just really lovely. And they have some new bases that I would love to explore at some point. Anyway, let me put that aside, and I will show you. I have caked up the two. I mean, gosh, look at that. That's a thing of beauty, surely. And I've swatched a little for the Crystal Sweater, and this is how I swatch. I leave it on the needle so that I can unravel and not have to play yarn chicken, so I can use the yarn again, which means it may sometimes be an inaccurate swatch because I don't necessarily always wash it and block it. Sometimes I wash and block it sitting on the needle. I'm a bit lazy. I do make the swatch, but not necessarily the best way possible. But in the pattern for Crystal, it actually tells you how to make the swatch and tells you to cast on a certain number of stitches, and then to with a certain, was that tubular cast on, and this is just my right side little marker, and then to switch needles a couple of rows up for the ribbing. I didn't make 8 centimeters of ribbing. I didn't think there was any point in that because, you know, you can gauge your gauge on this. And then to continue with the pattern it's described. And you can see that here. I've done exactly what they've done. I've knitted flat. And this is why I was suddenly like, I know the sweater is bottom-up construction, so that you begin with the hem and you knit in the round, and then you separate and knit flat. Probably, there's a V-neck, so I'm not quite sure how to do that when you knit bottom-up. But that means this particular part of the swatch that I've made, knitted flat, only applies to the top part. The bottom part is knitted in the round, which made me wonder, why don't they ask me to do a swatch in the round? So I made a little sort of purl row here where you can see that I switched to knitting in the round, and I have not cut the yarn, which I probably should, but I'm too worried that I won't have enough yarn. I want every last meter for this project, because this is of course not the yarn that it calls for. And you can also perhaps see that my gauge changed. It was definitely a tighter gauge when I knitted flat compared to when I knitted so-called in the round. So I will definitely have to consider that once I begin on the sweater. But I love the stitch pattern or the lace pattern in this yarn. And of course I had initially bought this yarn to knit the Easy Like Sunday Morning sweater by Melissa Clulo, is that her last name? From Sandu Yarn. And I definitely still plan on knitting that, because I think it's a very wearable and comfy / elevated loungewear kind of look. I really would like that, especially I love the collar. But, well, I'm not a huge lover of just knitting stockinette. I do love it, but not as the only thing on a sweater. But also, this one had just been, I'd just been wanting to knit this for so long. And then, since I didn't have an off-white yarn, the yarn that the pattern called for, the yarn that the pattern calls for is Jensen yarn. I knitted the Classic by Anna Wenzel in that yarn a couple of years ago, and that's too rustic for me, so I was never going to knit with that anyway. Then I could have bought another off-white yarn, and I was thinking Eco Baby or Eco Soft by Isa would actually be a pretty good yarn for that. But I don't have that yarn in my stash, which would mean buying more yarn. And I'm not going to buy more yarn when I have perfectly wonderful yarn sitting here that would be lovely for this pattern. So when I've finished the Trellis sweater, this is definitely going to be my next cast on. And I'm so looking forward to it. I'm a little worried about the whole knitting bottom up, which is a little ridiculous because that's the only way I knit it back when I knit it 20 plus years ago. But now I've been so used to knitting top down and being able to try things on along the way and, considering how long do I then want it. So the bottom up is going to be a new experience, but I think I'm just going to trust the pattern, to be honest. I've knitted the C2 sweater by Helga Isa. So I've knitted the one sweater by her before. And strangely, this time I seem to hit gauge. I didn't back then, which is a little weird. And considering now that I went down half a needle size, millimeter needle wise, on this one and also on this one, I'm kind of thinking, am I becoming a somewhat looser knitter? I have no idea. It could also be the yarn. And this is one reason why I and you should also swatch every time, because you just never know if suddenly your gauge is different because of a new yarn combination. And also, as I discovered last year when I knitted the Joni top with a linen yarn, that yarn didn't glide on my needle, at least, the way wool combinations or wool yarns do. So I had a looser gauge and did not go up a needle size the way I'd previously done. So there's definitely some learning and maybe some development in that. I don't know. I don't know if it's common to suddenly change the way you knit. I think I do still knit pretty tightly, but maybe not as dramatically tightly as I used to. So that is definitely in my future, and I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's just so beautiful. Something else that I just wanted to share. It's still not something I know what I'm going to do about yet. I'm really on the fence about what to do. And I'm not sharing this because I need you to tell me what to do, because actually opinions might make it even more difficult. But because I'm sometimes I have such a hard time deciding things. I'm a Libra. Libra is my primary sort of astrological zodiac sign is. The secondary one, which is the moon one, I think, that's a Gemini, which is also two-headed, if you will. So I always find it not always. I sometimes find it really difficult to decide on things, because I can always weigh up, well, on the one hand that, on the other that, But this project that I mentioned, I also got yarn for another garment that I'm probably not gonna make. I'm gonna make something that I already had my eye on, but I will show you the yarn. It's also from A Knitter's World, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's these two skeins. Yeah. So this is 90% extra fine merino superwash and 10% baby camel, and it's an undyed, so it's like a off-white. And this is the silk mohair, which is 77% superkid mohair and 23% silk. And it's one of these sort of variegated colorways called Beach House. It's definitely got one of those sort of Nordic beach vibes. And I've been swatching. And the only thing I know for sure is that it's going to turn into a cardigan. The little cakes look like this now. I've been swatching for... Well, first I made a swatch for the project I was going to make, and it turned out quite nice. Something like this. I've ripped this out and tried on another needle, so it looks a little wonky and bumpy. And also it's difficult to see the color here. I would say it's like a sand color, a cool sand color, cool-ish, not extremely cool, but coolish sand color. It looks more gray here than it does knitted up, I feel, but that's probably because this is maybe a little warm and this takes a little bit of the warmth away. But I'm all about the cardigans, and now that I've knitted this one, I've been wanting another one because I find them so wearable and necessary. And I've swatched for 2 different cardigans on the same needle size, and this is the one swatch. I don't know if you can see it very clearly. It's a little, in some lights it's a little darker than I would prefer, especially since the original pattern, the original garment that I've been swatching for, is knitted in a very light off-white, and it's the Villa Wrap by Anna Wenzel, her most recent cardigan, which is a really beautiful piece. If I had a very white or light off-white creamy colored yarn, I would probably use that, but I have this gorgeous combination, and this is the yarn that I want to use. My criteria is first and foremost to use this yarn, not to create that jacket or cardigan wrap, Villa Wrap. And I'm not sure how I feel about the colors in this. Every now and then I'm like, ooh, I love it, and then I'm like, not sure. And then I tried just swatching, making a regular stockinette, which looks like that, and nobody can see what I've swatched for there. I should probably have made the cables. That's part of this project, but not very many cables. But it's the Popo cardigan by Sara Nordland, and it was the reason I bought this book last year. And I'd seen the picture of this cardigan on her page on Instagram, and I immediately fell in love with it and immediately pre-ordered the book. And it's actually knitted in Durarum Natura Gilead. I do have some Durarum Natura Gilead, but I don't have enough. I bought 5 balls of it in New York, in Brooklyn General last year, and this requires 6 for my size. and it's also gray, and I kind of wanted something a little more off-white, like the sample here. I'm going to show you another photo. I don't know if it's yet only available in the book. I imagine it is, and then someday it's going to be available as a separate pattern. It also has a shorter version in a dark color, but I'm definitely drawn to the long version and the belt. I showed my partner a picture of both an Evensel's design and this one, and I'd first been swatching for the Evensel one, and he said, yeah, that's really beautiful. And he knows I enjoy or love an Evensel's designs, and it's been a while since I've knitted something by her, and I'd really like to knit something by her again. And then I showed him this photo, and I said, but which one do you think I should knit? Or which one do you think I would love the most? And the minute he saw this, he said, but you do like cardigans with a belt. I was like, how did you know that? But that's true, I do. I remember when she was first showing pictures of the design for Villa Wrap, she wrote, I'm even considering adding a belt. I'm like, yes, please add a belt. And she replied, but she didn't add a belt. And of course, it's quite short, so a belt would look weird with that cardigan. A belt doesn't belong in that. The design is absolutely gorgeous without the belt. But there's just something about this and the belt. I've sometimes wanted to knit a belt for the Cardigan because I just like to tie myself up and to be able to open it again. So it would be a detachable belt in the sense that there are little loops on the side. I also at one point used a sort of a shawl pin for this, which is nice sometimes if it's a little cooler. So you don't just have the flaps hanging loose every time. So I'm so undecided about this. I can't decide. I was even actually considering swatching for a third cardigan that I've also had my eye on for a while, which is the Balloon Jacket or Ballonjacke by Petit Knit, which has the same vibe that I really enjoy, the whole sort of elevated loungewear kind of thing, beach wear, something you throw over on a chilly summer's evening. And it would be so obvious with this, with the color Beach House being the silk mohair. But I'm like, oh my God, let's not make it even more difficult for me to decide. So I've sort of decided not to go there. It's still on my radar, but possibly for another yarn. I could see it both in a really lovely off-white or a really dark charcoal gray in the winter. I keep sort of vacillating between different kinds of aesthetics. In the summertime or in the lighter part of the year, it's typically this sort of coastal, beachy look where it's like a Scandi vibe, but also kind of a Japanese vibe. The most recent word I heard to denote this is called Japandi. Caroline and I talked about this recently, that it's one of the reasons possibly that I like many Japanese designs, because they have that same sort of airy minimalist look, and I really love that. But also some unusual silhouettes often. That's one of the aesthetics that I gravitate toward, and usually it's in light and neutral colors. The other is the sort of more moody, wintry look, where I could imagine the balloon jacket in a dark, charcoaly grey, and I absolutely love that as well. That was part of the reason why I loved the yarn Winterfell for my javelin shawl. But now it's supposedly spring, not very springy today, I have to say. But I would like to introduce lighter colors into my wardrobe just now. And apropos spring and summer, I've seen a lot of videos that talk about spring and summer knitting plans. And frankly, I'm just not feeling the summer knits yet. Maybe because of the weather. It could very well be because of the weather here, but I find it so difficult to zoom in on or to find really beautiful summer knitting patterns. Partly or not, I don't find it difficult to find beautiful knitting patterns that are summery, but I think I gravitate towards something simple and easy in the summer, and that's typically a white t-shirt, just a white cotton t-shirt. And if it's knitted, I'll easily feel a little more hot in it. And also, I don't know. I see some knitted t-shirts that I don't know, and tops would just be. I'm not sure. I just haven't found any yet. Just not feeling it yet. So I'm definitely undecided in that regard as well. There are one or two blouses that are a little more springy, summery that I'm leaning toward. One I think is definitely in my future, and the yarn I've pretty much already decided on it, but it's not in my life yet. So I don't want to share anything in case I backtrack and decide on something completely different. There might also be a shawl in my future. I saw somebody knitting a shawl a while back where I'm like, oh, if I do that, I could use up a lot of my stash and I could go for a certain color scheme. So I've been playing around with that, but as yet the yarn is just sitting on my shelf and I'm kind of going back and forth. Do I have enough? So if I end up going down that road, you will hear about it in my next video. And I'm kind of excited about it because it's playing a little bit around with color and choosing differently from the pattern. I think that's always interesting. Before I wrap up, I just want to briefly mention a couple of books that I've been reading lately and these two non-knitting podcasts that I've been watching lately. If that's not for you, I thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it so much that you've taken the time to sit and spend some time with me and listening to me chat. But the two books, they're completely different. One book is for one of my reading groups, and it's The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. And I mention it simply because I really enjoyed it. And I didn't, in the beginning, I thought, is this some kind of young adult novel? And then I really got into it and I really enjoyed it. It has a little bit of a Southern Gothic vibe, and it's very feel good. It tilts slightly over into something Hallmarky every now and then, but not too bad. It was heartwarming and it was lovely in many ways. So if you want to read something feel good and a quick read, then this was a cute book. The other book is completely different, and it's certainly not for everyone. I'm listening to it as an audiobook, and it's called 3 Magic Words by U.S. Anderson, USA. And it's from, I think, the 1960s somehow. It's a book that went under the radar for years until I think Eckhart Tolle mentioned it in a video, and he has also written the foreword, and it's that kind of book. It's, again, self-help sounds patronizing. That's not quite what it is, but it talks about the power of the words that you speak to yourself, the power of how you manifest things in life, long before people talked about anything like the law of attraction. I mean, so this was a pioneer in that field. I'm not finished yet, but I've listened to many hours so far on walks, and I can already tell I need to re-listen to it, but it's powerful stuff. And in that department, the two podcasts I just want to mention, they're actually a particular episode. One is, I've talked about Gabor Mate before, who is just a wonderful human. Love Gabor Mate. And it's an interview that I recently listened to and watched by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, a British Indian doctor who's really smart, and they're both really empathic, wonderful humans. And this conversation that they have is just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. So if you want to listen to some smart people who can give you some tools to improve your life, to know yourself better, listen to this one. And the other one in that connection you need to listen to, if you like that sort of thing, is the doctor that I mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Dagner Keltner, who, despite the sound of the name, is actually American. And it's an interview with him on The Diary of a CEO, which is a British podcast by a young CEO who's extremely bright also, who interviews. He's also interviewed Gabor Mate, I believe. I've listened to many of his conversations, and this one struck a new chord. He talks about awe, And he talks about compassion, and he talks about kindness, and how cultivating these feelings can actually improve our lives and our nervous system, our immune system. And it was just mind-blowing and useful. So I can definitely recommend both of those. I will link to them in the show notes below, just like I've linked to everything, I hope. So on this absolutely rainy and slightly gloomy day, I will take my leave and say thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you are able to go out and find little moments of awe in your life. And I hope you're knitting on something that gives you joy, and that you might sometimes even be able to venture into that realm of finding awe and feeling awe, and losing yourself a little in that process, which can sometimes be healthy, I think. I think I've probably forgotten a ton of things because I no longer script the videos, because there's just too many things to remember. That means I forget stuff. But then, there it is. I imagine you might even be able to hear the rain now. But thank you so much, and go with peace and namaste. And I hope everything is right with you in your world and all the rest of it. Thank you so much, and bye.